More than a decade after Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 vanished from radar shortly after taking off from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia's Transport Ministry has now announced that a private marine.
More than a decade after Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 vanished with 239 people aboard, the world has not received the ending it hoped for. There is no wreckage on the seafloor confirmed as the missing Boeing 777, no black box recovered, and no single answer that closes the file. What the last 2 years have actually produced is something quieter and, in its own way, more unsettling than any dramatic discovery, a series of extraordinarily advanced deep-sea searches, backed by cutting-edge science, that have still come up empty. This is the real aftermath of MH370 in 2026, built entirely from verified reporting and official statements, not speculation. The story begins, as it always does, on March 8, 2014, when the plane, a Boeing 777-200ER registered as 9MMRO and carrying 227 passengers and 12 crew, disappeared from civilian radar less than an hour after leaving Kuala Lumpur for Beijing, shortly after air traffic control handed the flight off toward Vietnamese airspace. Military radar tracked it turning back across the Malay Peninsula before it vanished into the vast southern Indian Ocean, and in the years that followed, an international search effort, first led by Australia's Maritime Safety Authority and later coordinated by the Australian Transport Safety Bureau, covering well over 100,000 square kilometers of seabed, found nothing. What did eventually surface was debris, a flaperon that washed up on Reunion Island in 2015, followed by more than 24 other confirmed or suspected fragments that drifted ashore across Madagascar, Mozambique, Tanzania, and South Africa in the years afterward, along with a scattering of unconfirmed reports of wreckage sightings in places like the southern Philippines that were investigated and ultimately could not be substantiated. Those verified pieces became the only physical proof the world had that the aircraft had ever touched the ocean at all, and they also became the foundation for the scientific work that has driven the newest search efforts. That foundation is barnacles. Attached to several of the recovered fragments were shells of the species Lepus antitifera, a type of goose barnacle that grows in daily and seasonal layers, not unlike growth rings in a tree, and that absorbs trace chemical signatures from the surrounding seawater as it grows. Researchers realized that if they could read those chemical layers, they might be able to reconstruct a rough timeline and even a drift path for the debris, working backward from where it washed ashore toward where the aircraft may have first entered the water. A team led by scientist Gregory Herbert has spent recent years refining exactly this technique, and their findings, published this year, suggest that larger and older barnacle shells recovered from any future debris could extend that chemical record even further back in time, potentially narrowing the search zone in a way that satellite data alone never could. It is patient, unglamorous science, built one microscopic layer at a time, and it stands in sharp contrast to the sensational discovery stories that periodically circulate online. Before any of this newer science entered the picture, Malaysia had already tried to close the book once, and even that attempt fell short. In July 2018, after a 4-year investigation, a 19-member international safety team released a 495-page report examining every available piece of radar data, satellite communication, maintenance record, and crew history. Investigators confirmed that the aircraft had turned back across the Malaysian peninsula through manual control rather than any automated or remote system, ruling out a specific theory that the plane could have been hijacked electronically from outside the cockpit. They also found no evidence of mechanical failure, no flagged maintenance issues, and nothing in the aircraft's systems that could explain the diversion on its own, which led the team to conclude that the flight's path was most likely the result of deliberate human input rather than an accident. At the same time, the report was careful to state that without the wreckage and the flight recorders in hand, investigators could not rule out every alternative explanation, and Kok Soo Chan, who led the investigation team, told reporters plainly that the group was unable to determine the real cause of MH370's disappearance. The report also uncovered uncomfortable details closer to home, including procedural lapses at Kuala Lumpur's Air Traffic Control Center, where controllers failed to maintain proper radar monitoring and handed off control of the flight before confirming it had safely reached Vietnamese airspace, delays that likely slowed the initial response once the aircraft went silent. Those findings were serious enough that Azharuddin Abdul Rahman, who had headed Malaysia's Civil Aviation Department at the time of the disappearance, resigned from his subsequent post as chairman of the Civil Aviation Authority of Malaysia shortly after the report's release, citing the findings related to his former department's operations. For families who had waited 4 years for a definitive answer, the report's core conclusion, that the true cause could not be determined without recovering the aircraft itself, was its own kind of quiet devastation. Armed with this refined understanding of ocean drift, along with more than a decade of accumulated satellite and current data, Malaysia moved to restart the physical search. In March 2025, the Malaysian government signed a new agreement with Ocean Infinity, the same U.S. and UK-based marine robotics company that had led earlier privately funded search efforts. The arrangement was a no-find, no-fee contract. Ocean Infinity would only be paid if it actually located the wreckage, with reporting indicating a payment of $70 million tied to a successful find. Officials identified a new 15,000 square kilometer zone in the southern Indian Ocean, chosen because it represented what investigators described as the highest probability area based on the latest combination of satellite handshake data, drift modeling, and the barnacle research. It was, on paper, the most scientifically informed search attempt yet undertaken. The operation itself unfolded in 2 separate phases. The first ran for a short window in late March 2025, and the second, far longer phase stretched from December 31, 2025, into January 23, 2026. Between them, Ocean Infinity's autonomous underwater vehicles mapped approximately 7,571 square kilometers of seafloor, using next-generation sonar and AI-assisted mapping systems capable of operating largely independent of surface support for extended stretches, reaching depths that in places exceeded 4,000 meters. It was slow, methodical work carried out in one of the most remote and hostile ocean environments on the planet, where unpredictable weather, powerful currents, and near-total darkness at depth have defeated search teams for more than a decade. And then, on March 8, 2026, exactly 12 years to the day after the plane disappeared, Malaysia's Air Accident Investigation Bureau delivered the news that families had been dreading. The agency informed relatives that the operation had not produced any findings confirming the location of the wreckage. There was no dramatic sonar contact, no debris field, no fuselage resting intact on the seabed. After everything, the refined drift models, the barnacle chemistry, the highest probability search zone, the newest generation of underwater drones, the ocean had once again given up nothing. Ocean Infinity did not simply walk away quietly. The company continued assessing the data and, in June 2026, formally announced the conclusion of this phase of the search. In a public statement, the company noted that since first taking on the MH370 mission in 2018, it had spent a combined 151 days at sea across its various campaigns and had mapped more than 140,000 square kilometers of seafloor in total. Company representatives described the effort as carried out with a level of scientific rigor, automation, and organizational experience that would have been unimaginable when the search first began, and acknowledged plainly that despite every advantage modern technology could offer, they had not been able to find the aircraft. It was an unusually candid admission from a private company that stood to earn tens of millions of dollars for success and nothing at all for failure, and it underscored just how difficult this particular patch of ocean has proven to be. Even so, the story has not fully closed. Later in June 2026, reporting indicated that Malaysia's government was extending the window for Ocean Infinity to complete exploration of its identified focus area, keeping the $70 million incentive on the table if the company's crews managed to locate the crash site of the 777-200ER registered as 9MMRO. That aircraft, which had been operating the MH370 route on the night it disappeared, remains the physical object every search since 2014 has been trying to find, and as of the middle of 2026, it still has not been located. Malaysia has continued to face pressure both domestically and internationally, including ongoing legal proceedings brought by grieving families in courts as far away as China, where relatives have pressed for what they describe simply as facts, more than a decade after being told almost nothing definitive at all. What makes this chapter of the MH370 story genuinely striking is not a shocking discovery, because there hasn't been one. It is the sheer scale of what modern technology can now do and still fail to accomplish. autonomous vehicles that require no human tether, AI-assisted sonar that can distinguish natural seabed features from artificial debris at a glance, chemical forensics precise enough to read a barnacle shell layer by layer like a diary of ocean temperatures and currents. All of it has been thrown at this problem, and the southern Indian Ocean has absorbed every bit of it without giving up its answer. That, in its own way, is the real aftermath no one expected, not a wreck bristling with secrets, but a demonstration of exactly how vast, deep, and indifferent that stretch of water actually is, even to the best tools humanity has ever built to search it. The 2018 report also raised an odd, lingering detail that investigators never fully resolved, given how many of the mostly Chinese and Malaysian passengers were likely carrying cell phones compatible with regional networks, and the possibility that some of those phones remained in an operational state during the flight. Investigators found it unusual that no additional phone registrations were recorded as the plane passed within range of cell towers during its final hours. It is the kind of loose thread that fuels continued research and speculation alike, precisely because it cannot be definitively explained without more data than currently exists. Next up, King Groups pressed investigators at the 2018 briefing about other unresolved matters too, including questions about debris that had been sitting in storage in Malaysia without full public disclosure of its examination, a reminder that even confirmed physical evidence has not always been shared with families as openly as they would like. For the families of the 239 people who boarded that flight in March 2014, this outcome carries a particular kind of exhaustion. Every renewed search cycle, 2014, 2018, 2025, and now the extended 2026 effort, has followed the same emotional arc: cautious hope, months of silence, and then an official statement confirming that nothing new has been found. Advocacy groups and independent researchers, including long-running volunteer efforts that track satellite signal data and debris drift patterns, continue to publish updates and propose alternative search coordinates, keeping public attention on the case even when government-backed search vessels are between contracts. Whether any of those alternative theories will eventually point investigators to the right patch of seafloor remains an open question, one that has outlasted multiple search companies, multiple governments, and more than a decade of grief. Some of that independent research has focused on unconventional data sources entirely, such as amateur radio propagation signals that some researchers argue can be cross-referenced against known aircraft flight paths to suggest alternate crash coordinates, though these methods remain contested within the broader aviation research community and have not been adopted by official investigators. What all of these efforts share, official and independent alike, is the same basic constraint: without the aircraft itself, every theory remains exactly that, a theory, no matter how much data or modeling supports it. It's worth being direct about something here. In recent years, a number of viral videos and articles have circulated claiming that MH370's wreckage has already been found, sometimes describing dramatic details like an intact fuselage, remains still strapped into seats, or evidence of a deliberate cover-up. None of that has been confirmed by any investigating authority, and as of the most recent official statements from Malaysia's Air Accident Investigation Bureau and from Ocean Infinity itself, the aircraft's location remains unknown. Treat any claim of a confirmed discovery with real skepticism unless it is backed by an official government or investigator statement, because this is a case that has attracted more misinformation than almost any other aviation mystery in history, precisely because so many people desperately want it solved. So where does that leave things at the end of the summer of 2026? The search zone identified through the barnacle and drift model research has been surveyed, at least in part, and has not produced the wreckage. Ocean Infinity has publicly acknowledged the failure of this campaign while leaving open the possibility of continuing within an extended window under the existing no-find, no-fee arrangement. Scientists studying barnacle chemistry believe that future debris, if it washes ashore, could sharpen the search area even further, meaning the case is not necessarily closed even though this particular expedition ended without a breakthrough. And somewhere in the southern Indian Ocean, across thousands of square kilometers of largely uncharted, crushingly deep seafloor, a Boeing 777 carrying 239 people is still, as far as anyone can verify, exactly where it has been for the past 12 years, unfound. The disappearance of MH370 remains, by any honest measure, one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in the history of commercial aviation. What separates 2026 from every earlier chapter isn't a discovery, it's the quiet, well-documented persistence of scientists and search crews who keep trying anyway, refining their methods year after year, even as the ocean continues to keep its secret. That persistence, rather than any fabricated wreckage scene, is the real story worth telling right now.